Welcome to the Vintage Ballers Podcast. I'm your host, Brad Coreno, and on today's episode, we have Erick Strickland joining the show. Erick is one of the most talented high school athletes to ever come out of the state of Nebraska, where he excelled at baseball, basketball, and football. He went on to play college basketball at Nebraska before playing 9 years in the NBA. So without further ado, please welcome Erick Strickland. What I want to do, Erick, is I want to take it through your career and kind of go back to your childhood and take it through college at Nebraska. And then, because a lot of people don't know, you play with 3 other NBA players in Nebraska, obviously. And then, and we have here in Cleveland, Ty Lue is a very special person here just because he won that championship in 2016. So we'll always remember him. He gets standing ovations every time. So again, and Piakowski, of course, the sharpshooter, Mikey Moore, you guys had some great players in that team. So I want to get to that. Yeah. And, before we do, let's go back to your childhood. And I know, Erick, you were born in, I think, Alabama and then moved to Nebraska. When did you move and when did you fall in love with basketball?
So my childhood was kind of wild because my dad and my mother were together, but my dad was a young second lieutenant, and so obviously he wasn't with us, and he was stationed at that time in Great Falls, Montana. So I was a young kid, kind of starting to get into some trouble down in Alabama, and was kind of going the wrong way. And my mom and dad had a conversation, and my dad stepped up, and so I ended up going and living with him. And so I was in Great Falls, Montana, as a young kid, and so basketball, sports was always I was just a gifted kid. I was just God gifted. You know what I mean? I wasn't necessarily. I think I was special in my own eyes, and I did special things. Growing up, I was a big kid. So just to give you an example, I was 6'3". I was 6'2" in dang near the 8th grade.
Wow.
So, yeah. So I thought I was going to be 6'6", 6'7", and then I all of a sudden hit a stop right around 9th grade. But so I moved to Great Falls. Then at that time, we ended up moving. That was like in 83 to 86. And then from 86 to about 89, we were in Vandenberg Air Force Base, which is in Lompoc, California. So I got a chance to grow up playing with like Napoleon Kaufman, who played for the Oakland Raiders and was a really good running back at Washington, and ended up having a good, solid NFL career. So then my father decided to move, and we got stationed in Nebraska, in which I was hesitant and wanting to do that, but it ended up working out well.
Now, what part of Nebraska?
There, and I was there. Oh, it was Bellevue. So the Air Force Base is like right next to Bellevue,
okay,
which is just south of Omaha. It's a suburb
Gotcha.
of Omaha, and ended up going to Bellevue West there. So as a gifted young kid, I was kind of weird. Being from a single family home, I was at home a lot by myself because my dad, obviously, as an officer, was, he had some different hours. So I had to grow up pretty fast. So I had an imagination as a kid that, helped me in my career, I think, all through the years. I was an avid sports follower, not just any particular sport. I just watched sports. And so I was intrigued by all aspects of sport. And I would go for hours. I'd go down to the elementary school and I would pretend I was the Boston Celtics against the LA Lakers. That was the rivalry at that time. So I would literally play like games as if I was all 5 players.
Erick, I did the same.
The ball.
Same thing.
Yeah.
Exact same thing as a kid.
Yeah.
Like with you guys. You guys were the guys we would play with in the 90s. But yeah, same exact thing.
Yeah, I would do that, and I'd fake like I'd pass it to the wing, fake like I was coming off pick and rolls and shooting, and the crowd was going crazy, and 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 buzzers and shot clocks and all that stuff as a kid. And I did that in all types of sports. I'd even do it with football.
Yep.
I would go outside and throw the baseball like I was pitching, and I'd throw the baseball against the garage. And the way it came off the garage would be like a hit, and I'd go and field it and throw the person out. I just, that was the kind of imagination I had as a kid. And I think that kind of just helped me along the way.
You're describing my childhood because that's exactly the baseball, football, basketball. And in the 90s, we were lucky to grow up in an era with, obviously the NBA had so many intriguing personalities. And, we grew up, like my generation I'm 38. So my generation grew up with you guys. I mean, it was 90. Yeah. That's why my page, I created the 90s NBA based on the fact that there wasn't any social media back then. So everyone had the magazines with the different rosters. And when people got traded, you had to figure out where do they go and you had to scratch them out. And it was, it's old school. So it was, and with you guys, especially I know you came out in 96 and, that whole draft class that's a whole different conversation. Just, legendary really. And that's not an or an overstatement. And college basketball, Eric, back in those days, people stayed 4 years. It wasn't now where it's one and dones. And I love college basketball now, but it's just not, to me, it's not the same as it was back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, where, you have guys staying longer. I mean, Tim Duncan stayed 4 years at Wake Forest, and he could have probably went out after his freshman year. So, again, we'll get to that, but you're describing my childhood to a T, throwing, the ball against a brick wall, playing football. And I used to play games. I actually had whole seasons I would just play with myself. Whole seasons of like in the NBA, for example, and I was a Cavs fan, so I would play out the whole season. I would play against every team. I knew every player. That's why me and my friends were the same way. We were all 10, 11, 12 years old, and that was what we did. Yeah. There wasn't as many video games. There wasn't social media, so we weren't on those, and I loved it. I wouldn't have traded that era for the world.
I agree. I absolutely agree. The other facet of our era was that we didn't really lock into one particular sport
exactly
so early on. We engaged and did. I think each sport gave us different elements. They worked different muscles. You trained differently. You stayed active, and so I think I learned from each sport. I was able to glean a piece of each of them, which made me probably a better basketball. The sad thing about it is basketball probably was my worst sport.
Wow, really?
That's the crazy part about it. Yeah, football was the best sport I was at.
What did you play in football?
I was a receiver. I was like back then the ratings were different, but I was rated like a top 10 receiver in the country.
Really? I never knew that.
Yeah. And I was all-state my sophomore and junior year. I didn't play my senior year just because of that weird kid part of me came out. I was 17, 18 years old looking at collective bargaining agreements and stuff and trying to say, well, this don't work. Football's not going to work for me because, one, I was looking at, the 10 years of careers and the average of that. And then I was looking at the aspect of when you get, even though you may sign a $60 million deal, your signing bonus may only be 5, 10 back then. And then your career was not, they can let you go at any point. So your money's really not your money. I didn't like that, So I looked at that. That's why I didn't play my senior year. Everybody, my Coach Feynman, my high school football coach, God rest his soul. He didn't like it very much. All the time I was down in Nebraska, Tom Osborne would continuously, every time I'd see him in the hall, Strick, when you coming? When you coming out? So I went out to practice, I think twice in spring, just to kind of wet my whistle and just realize getting calls and stuff that football was not going to be it. Basketball was it. Then I played, basketball all-state my junior and senior year. And then, and then my baseball coach, he was my marketing teacher. He was like, Strick, man, listen, I know you're not playing football this year, but I think if you play baseball, you'll get drafted. I said, yeah, right. I said, come on, man, stop. He's like, no, for real. I think I'm dead serious. I think if you play. So I didn't play. I think the last time I played was my 8th, 9th grade year. It was like Legion ball. And I played my senior year and hit like 483 and
oh my God.
Had, multiple scouts coming down to the school, and Yankees wanted to take me in the first round.
Really?
But they didn't want me to play. Yeah, they didn't want me to play. They didn't want me to play basketball, though. They were like, you'd have to be full-time if we're going to draft you. And the Marlins were like, we'll take you in the middle rounds. We'll draft you like 31st pick. And we'll take care of your school, and we'll give you a bonus, and you can play both. I said, wow. So that sounded intriguing, and that's what they did. They drafted me in the middle rounds. They paid for my school, so I'm probably the greatest walk-on in Nebraska history because they didn't use a scholarship on me.
No kidding. I never knew any of that. Wow. Yeah. I mean, and back then, to give people who especially younger kids listening who don't have perspective on this, back then, there were only, you got Bo Jackson, Dion, obviously, who played multiple sports, but it was, that to play multiple sports it's difficult. And when you're talking about being a top 10 receiver in the nation and then being drafted in an MLB draft and then playing in the NBA, that's, Charlie Ward, there's not many people who could be at that level and can do multiple sports. So, there's a lot of good athletes, but to actually be really good at those sports is a whole different conversation. So with you, and especially at that point with Nebraska, with the football they had, they were winning national championships back then. They were the team.
Yeah. So,
it was the team.
Brad, you're absolutely right. The crazy part about it, right, is I said, okay, I'm going to go out. So I go to spring practice. And of course you have, at that time, the quarterback, Tommy had went on. Okay. So it was Scott Frost.
Yep.
And it was that national championship team that year. They won. And I'm out there in spring practice. Now, mind you, I haven't gotten a playbook yet. So we're going through different things. We're out and they're literally running plays. And they put me on the first team as a wingback and was like, now I don't know anything about any positions or where to go. They're just like, okay, you're going to go in motion here. Then you're going to run, a 5 and out, or you're going to run a squat, or you're going to run a post corner, or you're going to, they were basically telling me what I was going to do. And so that's how practice went while I was there. And then I just didn't go back. I didn't go back. I got word, from different people for scouting wise, hey, if you want to play basketball, you may want to get off the football field. That was the kind of messaging I was getting. And so I ended up missing a national championship. Wow. I would have won if I would have stayed on the team. But really, to be honest, Brad, even though, I was ahead of my time, okay? Meaning anything that was thrown in my hemisphere, in my area, anything that was thrown in my area was caught. I just had tremendous hands. I was very physical. I probably ran like a 4.6, 4.5. So I was ahead of my time. I would have been like a hybrid that they have now. Your Jimmy Grahams, yep. Your Ingrams from, yep. New York. I would have been kind of like that. You know what I mean? Just a real solid dude, like Niles Paul type. He was faster than me, but similar, right? But to be honest, defense was my best spot.
Where? What
I could have been anything from a rover, a safety, strong safety. I was a hitter, so it was like, like Steve Atwater type back in those days. You know what I mean? Because you could really lay wood, and I had good feet. I read patterns really well. Or I could have been even an outside linebacker, similar to like a Terrell Farley at Nebraska, guys that were just real scat runners. Levante David, similar.
Yep. Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean? That type of
great player. LB. Yep.
Yeah, is what I probably would have been.
It's funny. I actually had a couple. So being from Cleveland, I had Eric Metcalf and Reggie Langhorne on the podcast. And, Metcalf was talking about his time in the NFL. And we talked about a lot of the Atwater guys and Ronnie Lott. And some of those guys would lay you out back in that. Yeah. And it was a brutal era of the NFL. And, so with Nebraska, give us a quick background of Tom Osborne. What was it like? What was he like? And obviously he's a legend.
Yeah. Tom Osborne was an amazing man, like just all the way across the board. You could imagine when he told you something, he meant it. Like it wasn't fluff. When you as a parent or you as a player, when you sat down with him, you knew he genuinely meant what he said and he cared. You know what I mean? That's why, he was able to get the type of players he was able to get because parents knew that Tom Osborne was serious. So that was a intriguing thing. He had a brilliant mind with the way that he saw the game and the way that he put a game together and the staff that he amassed, which everybody was in sync. Everybody worked as a cohesive unit. So those are the good things about, Tom Osborne, his leadership, and he definitely was a phenomenal man all the way across the board.
Eric, where do you put? Because I mean, I feel like he doesn't get enough credit for. I mean, you hear obviously a lot about Coach Saban and Urban Meyer and Les Miles, all these different guys in the last 20, 25 years, but you don't really hear a lot about Osborne. I mean, in national media doesn't really talk as much about him, and he was a great coach. I mean, obviously led them to multiple national championships. I mean, you guys were the team in the 90s. There wasn't many teams. I mean, I think you and Michigan split it the one year, which was kind of weird to me. I think there should have been a game.
Yeah, it was weird.
Yeah.
Yeah, they should have played that one out.
Yeah, they should have played that one out.
Everybody loved it.
But I mean, every year Nebraska, number 1 or 2 in the nation, every year. And you guys are just loaded from top to bottom. So, when you look at Coach Osborne, do you think where do you put him in the all-time greats?
Definitely in top 10. There's no question. He fits in the top 10, and depending on how you feel about it, he could probably be in your top 5. Mm-hmm. But definitely in his top 10. There's no question.
In my lifetime, he's top 5. Yeah. No doubt about it.
Yeah, I would definitely say top 5 for me. But for others, they may have a different opinion. But I would definitely say that. No question.
And now for the basketball, I think it was Coach Nee back then, wasn't it? Back in the 90s?
Danny Nee, yep.
Danny Nee. And you guys, all the publicity went to the football team, obviously, rightfully so, because they're winning national championships. But you guys had a pretty good run there. I mean, you guys were always over 500. I think you won 20 games multiple times when you were there. And for those listening, you had Mikey Moore, played in the NBA for years. You had, obviously, the sharpshooter Eric Piatkowski, played for the Clippers for a while. You had Ty Lue, who in Cleveland here, everyone knows Ty Lue. He's a legend. And then, of course, you had, Erick Strickland. So you guys had 4 NBA players in that team, and I think that's one of the most unsung teams.
5.
Who was you had a couple other players.
Should have had 5.
Who was the 5th?
Yeah,
that should have been
there. His dad was Ron Boone, who played a lot of years with the. He actually probably has, other than AC Green, the record of the most consecutive games played. If you were to add the ABA and you would have tied that in. That was his dad, Ron Boone. Okay. So his name was Jerron Boone. Jerron Boone was a phenomenal. Actually, he probably was way more gifted than I was. He was 6'6", real silky, could play the point, played multiple positions, had a stroke on him. Just kind of got caught in a few things that probably hindered his potential. And then Andre Woolridge should have, but he ended up transferring to Iowa, but he probably should have made it too. But, people have different pathways, and it's unfortunate that they did. But I definitely believe Jerron should have definitely been a top lottery pick, no question.
Wow. Okay. I don't remember him. I'll have to look up because I remember a lot of the rosters in college basketball. I definitely remember you and some of the other guys in Nebraska. I forgot that Mikey Moore went there. And I was like, Mikey Moore was on that team too. I completely forgot he was. I knew you and Piatkowski and Ty Lue, but I completely forgot about Mikey Moore. I'm like, that was a talented roster.
Mikey was a tough. Yeah, he was a tough little skinny dude.
Yep. Oh yeah. I remember him when he played for the Nets. Oh yeah.
Yeah, but he figured it out, man. He figured out his role and figured out what he needed to do, and amassed a great long career. Yeah, for sure.
And when you look back at those years in Nebraska, what are some of your favorite memories, and what was it like playing with those guys? Because you had obviously other NBA talent on that team, so it had to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, it definitely was. I mean, we're a hard-nosed team. We're a grinding team. We battled. We fought. We gave people problems because we were physical, and we had guys that had chips on their shoulders and were dogs. So that led us. It was unfortunate that our times in the NCAA tournaments, it just seemed like everything just went wrong. I mean, we had great teams. The teams we were playing, I think we played Penn one year. They weren't better than us. We just couldn't freaking buy a shot. It was just one of those things. And then, Mississippi State, they beat us. I mean, they really did. They handed it to us.
Was that Dampier? Was he there then?
Shoot, you know what? No, it was New Mexico. It was New Mexico. I apologize. Yeah, they had some guys that they just physically athletic. They were above everything on the rim. Everything was coming down the rim. They were just really athletic, and they played real well that game. It was unfortunate that we weren't able to pull a win off, but then we ended up winning NIT, which was phenomenal after a turbulent season that we had. To be able to finish off the season the way we did and show that we're a lot better than what we showed during the season, and ended up winning NIT against we made a nice little run. I mean, we beat a Fresno State team and a Colorado State team. All of them were like right there on the verge of breaking through for the NCAA tournament. And then I think we went through Washington State, and then we ended up playing a real tough Tulane team back then.
Who was on that team?
Like Gerald Honeycutt.
I remember Honeycutt. Oh yeah, I remember Honeycutt.
All that crew, yep. Yeah, they were really tough. We ended up beating them, and then played a real tough St. Joseph's team, and it was crazy. The Nebraska fans filled the gym. We had more fans than the Philly fans that were right down the street. It was amazing. Yeah,
that's crazy. And who, out of all those guys or all the teams you played, who was the toughest guy you ever had to guard in college basketball?
Oh shoot, I had Sean Respert.
I remember Sean.
State. Sean was tough. Oh shoot, I had Rex Walters.
Oh yeah, shooter
was yep. Tough. Then we played the Fab Five, and so I had to. I think I had to guard Jalen Rose, who was obviously tough. So I would say those are some of the ones that were really tough guards for me.
Yeah, there was such great talent back then. The Fab Five, that's another different conversation, but they changed. My brother was a class of 91 in basketball as well, and he was a very, very good player. He was actually the leading scorer in the city of Cleveland back then. So he knew the Fab Five. You played against him in AAU tournaments. So he knew all those guys. He still talked to Jimmy King and Ray Jackson every now and then. So I remember growing up with those names, when I was real young, and I would hear Jalen Rose, these guys up in Michigan, Chris Webber. And so that's why I was such a basketball person, because of my brother. And, again, the talent back then was just, there was so much of it. And it was such an interesting time in college basketball. And they were one of the first teams I can remember, Eric, the Fab Five, that left early. Like, they all kind of left after their sophomore year. That just didn't happen very often. So now going into 96, and, is your mindset, I'm going to be drafted, or are you thinking like, okay, it could be, 50-50, or what's your mindset going into the 96 NBA draft?
Man, I think it was 50-50, but, definitely probably in the second round. But I was an anomaly, right? So at my size, 6'3", I never played point guard in college. So everybody knew I was a wing player, but undersized, probably considered a streaky shooter. So there was a lot of unknowns about me. They knew defensively I was a beast. I was a beast defensively. Yeah, one of my guys is they're reaching out to me. One of my guys. So with that being the case, it was very traditional. You know that.
Yep.
Right. So if you were a certain height, you were a point guard. If you were this, you were a 2. If you did that, you were a 3. And 3s even back then were anywhere from 6'6" to 6'10". Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? So, you had that type of flow. So I was just a player. And at that time, now players exist. Back then, if you weren't this, you weren't able to make it. So
yep.
I just really honed in off season. I really wanted to dispel anything that anybody thought about me. Had a real good summer league with Indiana, but didn't make their team, which Donnie Walsh said, dang, we should have kept you. When I did sign with Indiana, he's like, we really made a mistake. We're sorry about that, but, we are here now. But then ended up, I think I played with Jersey. Kerry Kittles was still on the team. He was the second year, so we played in summer league together. And then one scout just happened to be up there and is like, man, there's something about that kid. I just want to get him in the vet camp. He calls me up. His name is Ron Aker. He was a longtime scout for the Mavericks, and he's like, Strick, listen, we want to bring you in the vet camp. I asked him, I said, hey, do I have a legitimate shot to make this team? He said, yes. He said, we have a new ownership group. At that time, Don Carter sold the team to Ross Perot Jr. So nothing was set in stone. They had a new coach, new staff. They had 15 on their roster, so they were full. So I think Ross Perot Jr. had to eat like $1.2 million to keep me. So I just went into that season and that camp just saying, I'm going to hound Jason Kidd. I was very familiar with Jason. We played against each other in Vegas. I held him to like 5 points that game.
Wow.
And And so with that, I knew I wasn't afraid of him. Everybody else in the league and all of them were scared of him. I wasn't. So we almost got into some fights and stuff because I like a horse on, like fly on horse manure, I don't want to curse on your platform.
But, you can, I don't care.
Yeah. On shit. so yeah, I just hounded him. And then what ended up being a benefit to me was there was a lot of injuries. So, and Jimmy King was on that team. The guy named Tony Dumas.
I remember Tony Dumas. Yep.
Yeah, out of UMKC.
Yep.
Him, and then they had Jimmy Jackson and Mashburn.
He was a beast.
Kid, and Derek Harper, right?
That's right. Yep.
So all of these guys were there. So if you look at it, I probably didn't have a chance. But then injuries kicked in. So Jimmy was injured. Tony was injured. It was down to a few of us guards. So it was just me and Harp, right? And the first team was Jason and Jimmy and Mashburn. So they were trying to figure out, how we're going to make this work. And I said, man, I'll play the two. You know what I mean? I said, I'll guard Jimmy. And they were like, I'll guard Jimmy. And so finally they let me guard him. And they realized, they're like, wait, this kid can handle his own, against a strong Jim Jackson, you know what I mean? And, perennial scorer, I held my own. And so that's what changed their mindset about me and just made me a player and not a traditional point guard, even though I did play the point guard position, right?
That's interesting.
So that's how that happened.
And Eric, you play with Popeye Jones, I think, too, was on that team. And you had a lot of
Pop was on that.
Yeah, you had a lot of memorable names in that team. And you play with actually two iterations of that Dallas team. You play with the Jim Jackson, Mash, Kid iteration. And then you played, of course, later on before you left with Dirk, Steve Nash, Michael Finley. I think Sed Sabalas was on that team. So you played with a lot of talented guys in Dallas. Unfortunately, you were never there when they all put it together, but there was a lot of talent there.
That's what hurt.
Yeah. I mean, and obviously Dirk had that run and, and I want to get to this too in a second. You played with a couple guys young in their careers who ended up winning titles, Paul Pierce and of course, Dirk Nowitzki. So I wanted to get to that in a second too. And, what was it like playing with a young Dirk and a young Paul Pierce and then seeing them later on finally win those championships?
Well, I got to, me and Paul we're familiar with each other because I had to take care of him when he was at Kansas as a freshman. So we knew each other. So there was mutual respect between Paul and I, and we became friends. And we, whenever I would go to LA to work out in the off season and, play in the summer league, before I was even with Boston, Paul would say, I want Strick on my team. So we would play together. And so that's kind of how that familiarity. So when I got to Boston, it was just like a homecoming. It was a natural thing. That team was a phenomenal team. We surprised a lot of people. Everybody picked us to be at the bottom of the Eastern Conference that year. And for us to, be in the top 3 of the Eastern Conference blew everybody's mind. So that was fun. Seeing a young Dirk, I knew Dirk was going to be who he is, and as a Hall of Famer, you could tell he just had a work ethic that, preceded anybody that, in the league. He worked his tail off. I mean, hours before, hours after. He was in there with his shooting guy, Hogar. They were all the crazy shots you were seeing in his later career. He was honing that stuff early in his career. He just wasn't physical yet. You just knew that once he understood the physicality part of the game, to which it was exploited when they lost to that Golden State team in the first round that year, where I think they won 50 plus games.
They did 2007,
and they were at the top, one of the top seeded teams. They really punked him, and he learned from that. He didn't. After that, Miami and all of them got the brunt of a Dirk that was like, I'm not taking no more of this mess. So early on, you knew he was going to be great. He figured it out, and it was fun to watch him. It was good. A lot of people don't. This is one of the things that a lot of people don't know, and it's a claim to fame of mine. But when I was at Dallas, Steve was my backup. So
really,
now that's not to say I'm better than Steve, but yeah, he came off the bench, backed me up, and And a lot of the reason they had to get rid of me, and I understand it's a business. What they didn't know is they could have had a conversation with me. I would have deferred. You know what I mean? That's the kind of guy I was. But that deal was sprung by little Donnie Nelson. Big Don, I was Big Don's guy. You know what I mean? So little Donnie kind of sprung that to where he wanted to get me out of the way, because Steve, I would have made it difficult for Steve to progress into Steve. Without me there, I'm a problem in practice for people. You know, I was in your jock. You know what I mean? And it wouldn't have allowed Steve. I think Steve would have had look over the shoulder type pressure. Whereas without me there, he was able to play free. You know, he was able didn't have to worry about, you know, me or anybody or somebody coming off the bench for him if he made a mistake. And it allowed him to be able to make the things he was able to do as a player. So I understood why they did that, you know, get me out of the way. And because the city also, you know, favored me a little bit in that deal. So I get it, but I hated it because I can see we were going to win. I knew coming off 2002 that we were going to be close to a 50 win team. I knew it. And after you've given all your blood, sweat, and tears, and, you know, taken the beatings, that's the reward you want as a player. But I just wasn't able to, you know, attain it.
Yeah, you literally just missed it. And did you see the greatness in Steve Nash back then? Do you think this guy could be MVP one day? Because I don't think anybody would have seen that back then. But in practice, did you see any flashes?
I mean, yeah. I mean, he had great court vision. He had great footwork because he played soccer. So, you know, he had great footwork. You know, his vision, his court presence, his leadership, all of that, you could tell. It's just he played tight early on. You know what I mean? In the younger parts. And again, you know, with a guy like me being physical and, you know, hounding him the way, it made it tough. But you could tell he was going to be. I wouldn't say MVP-ish. You know what I mean? I think Dallas even missed that one. They didn't sign him and re-sign him. He goes over to Phoenix and does his thing. You know what I mean? He got with the style that made sense for him.
And I've had Stephen Hunter, who played center for that Phoenix team in 2005, and he was saying that team, I mean, Joe Johnson, the young team with Nash and Stoudemire and Marion, I mean, they were loaded. And he goes, Brad, we should have won the championship that year. We were they're beating people by 20 every game, and it was just you know, so that was you know, it's a shame that he never got that championship. Him and that whole team, that Phoenix team was just loaded in that era. But the Spurs, you had Pop, and then you had, you know, it just is. And then Kobe came along again with Gasol, and that was the end of that. But so I want to take it to the 2002 Celtics real quick. And I had Kenny Anderson on the show, and Kenny talked about that team as well. And you guys had a lot of gritty guys. Rodney Rogers played in that team.
Yeah.
I love Rodney. I mean, you know, a lot of gritty guys. Yeah. So, and of course, you know, young Antoine Walker, young Paul Pierce, Erick Williams, Tony Battier, was he on that team? Yeah, you had that's a lot of talented guys. I mean, it was a solid team. And I remember watching that game against the Nets. I was a senior in high school then, and me and my friends were watching it. We were probably partying. And I remember you guys came back. I think it was like a Sunday afternoon. You're down by like 20, and you guys came back in the fourth quarter. And I think to this day, 25. I think it's still the biggest comeback in fourth quarter history in the NBA and in the playoffs. It's incredible. Yeah. So what would you, at that point, take us through that particular game, what you remember of it, you know, in that fourth quarter? Were you guys just, you know, demoralized, or do you guys think we still have a shot at this? I mean, what was the mindset like going into that fourth quarter?
Well, for us, the way we played all year, it was never about a specific number or a lead. It was always a game within a game by quarter, no matter what the situation was. First quarter, we always said we want to win the first quarter. Then we knew it was a game of runs. We knew time runs would run out. So we knew defensively we had capabilities of getting stops. So we knew we could get back into games. So for us, it was a game within a game. It was, by this time, cut the lead to this. By this time, cut the lead to that. If we can get it to this, under this, we can make it something. And then, of course, we got hot and ended up, you know, Paul went nuts that game.
Yeah, so
it just ended up that way. I think the biggest problem I had with that series was we had not too long before that signed Tony Delk.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And Tony Delk was Jim O'Brien's guy from Kentucky. So there's familiarity with that, right? But it threw off the makeup of what made us who we were, because although Tony was a prolific scorer and he could do a lot of different things and he could stretch the floor, he shot the ball really well. But defensively he could be a liability, at times. So then they tried to integrate him into the point guard position, which that's not really what he did. So, and what made him successful. So, when Jim made the move to go with Tony Delk instead of me, the problem with that is we 3-1 New Jersey in the season the way we did it with me and coming off the bench behind Kenny, and it was that rotation, and I spell Paul and so forth and so on, right? And sometimes spell Ericks. So sometimes it'll be me, Kenny, Paul, and so forth. And I may guard a 3, and Paul may guard a 2. So we had that kind of makeup. That's the versatility we had. But what happened was we went away from that, and in getting away from that, Jason Kidd goes nuts, and that's where again why we were successful against them, because I'm able to physically match up with Jason and not allow him to do the things that he did successfully, is post up and, push the ball in transition and do all of that stuff. Yeah. And
I never even thought about how you were teammates the years, a couple years before that. And then of course you had Cal, or in Vegas, you played against him. So yeah, you would have known him very well. And that would have been the ideal matchup for you, as far as playing an opposing superstar, because you knew him so well and you knew how to guard him.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I never knew that backstory.
Yeah, that's the one thing, Brad, that kind of still irks me, because we should have beat them, no doubt.
And
we're a better team.
When you look at that, because I think you had a young Richard Jefferson in that team, and Kenyon Martin, those guys, they're all kind of coming up. Kerry Kittles. So you guys talent-wise are right there, pound for pound with them, and you probably have more veteran leadership with the guys you had with you and Rodney and some of the Kenny Anderson and those guys. So. I vividly remember watching that series, and I don't think anybody really knew who was going to come out on top, but I just remember the 25-point comeback. And then of course I remember the Nets going to the finals, and then LA, I don't know if anybody's going to be Kobe.
Yeah, smashing them.
Yeah, Kobe and Shaq, the way they were then.
That
was just that's a whole different story. But just to get to the finals would have been, for that young Boston team, would have been big. And it was nice to see Paul get it later on. Of course, he beat my Cavs in that run, but nice to see him get it later on and all those guys. But I just feel those young Boston teams had a lot going on and just never got over the hump, unfortunately. So it's good to hear that backstory. Right. I never really knew that about Tony Delk and that whole situation. It's interesting.
Yeah.
Now,
it was good.
Now I want to tell another guy I want to talk about is Reggie Miller. I know you play with the Pacers and you play with a young Ron Artest, Jermaine O'Neal, and Jamal Tinsley, all those boys. And again, another team that had some nice runs, never quite got over the hump. Obviously, the Malice and the Palace kind of derailed some of that. That was just I still have to watch that.
That was a championship year for them.
I was going to say that was a championship, no question. Because here we were LeBron was going into his second season here, so we were just focused on LeBron. We wanted to see how good he was going to be. But I remember playing the Pacers the first game that year, and they beat us, and I was like, wow, these guys are darn good. And Reggie was probably in year 16 or 17, whatever he was then.
Mm-hmm.
But what was it like playing with Reggie Miller? I mean, you got to talk about, I think he's still one of the top 5 shooters in NBA history, just pure assassins in NBA history. And where do you put him, and what was it like playing with him?
Well, definitely. I agree with your assessment with regards to his shooting prowess. Yeah, definitely in the top 5 tier. I think you got to look at Ray Allen. You got to look at Steph Curry now. Then you got to look at, definitely Reggie.
I got to give Clay his props. Clay's a heck of he's an assassin too.
Yeah, I would say I would put him in the top 10. I think I would say like a Glenn Rice maybe.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So there's definitely some killer shooters in there. But Reggie was fun. He was fun on the plane, off the plane, in the locker room. And what I would do to make myself better is after practice, I would do shooting games with Reggie. and we would do spot shooting games, and, you know, he would be shooting 8 out of 10 clips, and I would be trying to shoot for 7 out of 10, but trying to get 8 out of 10, I wasn't that, you know, I always wanted to make sure I found the best guys to shoot with, work against, so that it would keep me on my toes. And he was one of those guys that after every practice I'd get with, and we would do shooting games. And so he was fun. I didn't really get to hang with Reggie off the court too much. He kind of, you know, kept to himself, but around the locker room and on the court, he was a great leader. He kept a lot, because again, we had a lot of young guys with Jermaine O'Neal. We had Al Harrington, Jonathan Bender,
Bender.
Jamal Tinsley, all those guys. Yeah, they were really, really young. And so, so that was him being able to lead. He did the best he could. Malice in the Palace got away from him. But he once that happened, he lost it. He tried to do his best, because the issue was Jermaine and Ron Artest. They, at some point, they just couldn't connect, and that was unfortunate, because they were defensively is, you know, then the freaking active play of like the active play of like
Eric, do you have your camera turned off? There it is. It's back on.
Yeah.
Cool.
Somebody called. The active play of like Jeff Foster and those guys, you know what I mean?
Foster had a role in those Utah teams. Yep.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. So yeah, that was phenomenal.
I mean, Reggie, it's a shame that Reggie never got a ring. You know, all the great team, the Davis brothers and Smiths and you know, Mark Jackson. He played on some great teams and had some great teammates throughout the years, but never could get over the hump. And I always look at certain guys, you know, the Stockton and Malone and various guys who never got those rings. Chuck, obviously, and you know, Barkley, and there's a lot of them that never got a ring in that era. Patrick Ewing, and just so many great players that just they couldn't. I mean, Jordan stopped a lot of them from getting one. But
facts.
And did you, Eric? Did you ever get to face MJ one? You know, guard him in a game. And what was that like?
Both in Chicago and with Washington. So, you know, with MJ, you had to just be there. You know what I mean? I mean, he's got so many counters. I mean, between him and Kobe, they got so many counters that you just have to be there. And the best you could do is just be there and, you know, good, strong, high challenge the best way you could. And then with that, hope for the best. I mean, really, that was the best you can hope for, because, you know, they don't see you. They don't mind you being there. You know what I mean? So you have all those dynamics at work, man.
I mean, you're one of the few guys that can say he played in the same era as, you know, MJ, Kobe, and LeBron. I mean, you played a little bit, obviously LeBron his first year or two, and then of course you played right when Kobe.
KD.
And you came in when Kobe came in. So, and Iverson. So I mean, you played in a really interesting era of talented guys. When you look back at that '96 draft, you know, where do you rank that all time? And coming in with you came in with Kobe and Allen. So those two guys changed the league, obviously. And AI, I mean, in my generation, Eric, everyone started wearing baggier pants. Everyone started doing things that AI was doing. He was that much of a game changer. And I remember my friends going to their house and seeing his poster everywhere. Like Iverson was just, culturally, he was at that time, late '90s, he was right up there with MJ as far as what the influence he was having on my culture. So, you know, what we were doing, and he was that big. And of course, MJ was globally. So, you know, it was a very interesting time in basketball. But AI and Kobe, what was it? You know, where do you put those two guys all time, and where do you put that '96 draft class?
I would say the draft class definitely in the top 5 all time. No, there's no question. I mean, you just go up and down the board of that class, and you know, you can see all that came out of it. To include undrafted or second round guys, like, you know, I think I was honored to be a part of that redraft. You know, to be in the, you know, first round of that redraft, that was an honor. But to have guys like Ben Wallace that came out of that same class, who was second rounder, Hall of Famer now. Then you have, you know, Antoine Walker, you have Ray Allen, you have Kobe, you have, you know, Allen Iverson.
I think Marcus Camby was that.
It's Steve Nash.
Nash,
yeah,
yep.
you have all those guys, man, that was there. I mean, so I couldn't even be mad about not being drafted in that class.
I'll tell you what,
it was a phenomenal class.
If there's a class you're not going to be drafted in, that's probably one of the 2 or 3 you want to pick. That was just, I mean, that's right up there with 03 and 84. And those are just iconic draft classes. And again, you're one of the few players that can say they came into the league with Kobe, Iverson, Nash, all those guys. I mean, how many people can say that? And of course, Ben Wallace, like you mentioned, that's a great point. I forgot about Ben.
Yeah. And here's what's crazy is like, like in that year, I was probably ended up in the top 10 in rookie scoring.
Really? I didn't know that.
Group. So I averaged more than most, a lot of those guys. I averaged like 10.9 points per game in my rookie year.
I didn't realize that.
So,
I knew you were around.
A lot of them didn't. That was more than Kobe. Kobe was at 9, I think.
Wow.
So that was more than Kobe. That was more. The only ones that wasn't, it was Allen was more. I think maybe Ray Allen. But maybe Antoine. But I think I was in the top 10 as far as the rookie scoring.
No kidding. That's an interesting. I never knew that either.
Yeah.
Yeah, because we see the Cavs. We drafted Zadrunas that year, Agaskis, the big fella, and he was hurt the first couple of years, so we didn't even get to see. He was a great player. He ended up being a very good center for.
If he didn't have bad feet, he could have been tough.
Oh yeah, 7'3", could shoot from the outside. He was ahead of his time too. He was a great guy, and yeah, we call him Big Z here, but we love Z. But yeah, he was hurt those first couple of years. But anyways, that 96, I just remember watching the draft and thinking to myself, oh my God, I mean, I didn't even know how good Nash and those guys were, but just watching Antoine Walker and Iverson and those guys come out, we weren't even thinking Kobe. We knew he was a good high school player, but back then, KG and Kobe, no one really, high school, it wasn't like a thing necessarily back then. So we kind of thought, these guys are going to fade out eventually. I had no idea Kobe would be an all-timer, so, but going back and looking at your years, you played 9 years in the NBA as an undrafted guy. I mean, I had a couple other guys on here who played in the NBA for years, and they were undrafted as well. And to me, those are the most interesting players because you had to fight through a lot more adversity and you had to do a lot more things to get to where you got to. And to play almost a decade, Eric, that's a huge compliment. And I think when you look back, what was your favorite moment of those 9 years? Is there anyone that stands out or, a favorite season?
Definitely the 2000 season was probably the most fun because the first part of the season, if we don't sign Dennis Rodman, we probably make the playoffs.
Really?
Because, yeah, he just threw our chemistry. We had great chemistry as a team, and it was like 4-on-5 because Dennis was doing his own thing at that point. If we would have got the Dennis, the 96, that run Dennis, we could have did some things, but we got a shell of Dennis, and I mean we lost a lot of games in his short stint with us, but the second half of the season after the All-Star break, we ended up with the second. With the tie for the best record with the Lakers. No kidding. I didn't know that. We made a run. Yeah, we was running. I mean, we was running through people. We was running through the East or West. We was long win streaks. We were beating teams like San Antonio and doing weird stuff with them. That's what I loved because Don Nelson was like a mad scientist, bro. He was like, he would do stuff crazy. Like he would put me on Tim Duncan.
Really?
And
what's the reasoning behind that?
Because they were a matchup nightmare, right? So if you go with the traditional with Sean Bradley, AC Green, Mike Finley, Dirk, and so forth, and you go with that traditional lineup, we didn't match up well with them because Tim Duncan would just take them off, face them up, and shoot that little bank shot, back him up. If you don't, he's by you with the right. Or left with a spin to the right. He just had that kind of skill set. But what he would do is he would put me on Tim because, back then you could play physical. So my goal was to not let Tim get to an advantage point, which was the block. So I'd keep him off the block. And then he's in my zone because to put it down now, yeah, that's what I want you to do. and then I can press him enough to not let him get comfortable with that bank shot, and then just put a body on him. And I was a really good guard rebounder, so I didn't mind mixing it up. I mean, I think there's a picture of me blocking out Yao Ming one time. I didn't mind mixing it up in there with guys. Yeah, there's a picture of me blocking out Yao Ming. But with that, man, we would do that kind of matchup because the way Don would think, and he was a mismatch creator. And so he would say, okay, it looks like it's a mismatch here, but I trust Strick enough to be able to do the job to make it difficult. But what are they going to do on the other end? Who's going to guard me, and who's going to guard, Cedric, and what are you guys going to do? And that's where we took advantage of that. We created that mismatch that we were able to exploit. So we put AC Green on David Robinson. I covered Tim. Dirk and Cedric switched off on Sean Elliott, or they put Michael Finley on Sean Elliott, put Mario Ellie. They had either, Dirk or because Mario was a great spot up guy. He wasn't really going to beat you off the dribble. So, Dirk didn't have a problem with that. Sad didn't have, even though they were defensive liability, they didn't have a problem with that. And then, of course, you put Steve Nash on Avery Johnson. And when Steve was out of the game, you just, put Sad or Dirk on Avery Johnson and let them just feel the pain, rebound. And that's how we won. That's how we beat them.
I mean, you guys did have a lot of talent. It's a shame that it was still young, obviously. But if you had a more mature Dirk and Nash at that point, you guys would have been very scary.
Oh, yeah.
Because you guys had some talent. And people forget how good of a shooter and how good of a player Michael Finley was too. I mean, he was you guys had, that was legit talent back then. And
for sure,
Eric, when you look back in your career, for those 9 years, obviously I'm sure MJ and Kobe will be top of this list, but toughest guy you ever had to defend?
Well, a lot of people would think differently because they would look at, but I had guys I hated to guard. So it wasn't necessarily that certain people like Stephon Marbury's and, Baron Davis's, they didn't give me major problems because physically I can handle that, right? They were physical guys, they strong to the basket. I can handle that. Allen Iverson wasn't a major trouble for me because my thing was I'm making Allen go left as much as possible. If he's going left, he's shooting. I can handle that. I can handle him going left and shooting as opposed to going right and getting contact and getting floaters and doing all of those things going right. The guys I hated to guard was like Nick Van Exel or Damon Stoudemire, or I hated Rip Hamilton and Reggie Miller, because they freaking ran forever. They were getting screens forever. And I hated that about Rip because he just never stopped. I had to get sleep. You know what I mean? About those guys.
Oh, he had a great mid-range game.
Yes, absolutely. But with regard to Nick and Damon, they were herky-jerky. They didn't have a pattern to their game, which freaking, I loved having a pattern. You know what I mean? Like for example, guarding MJ and guarding Kobe, I knew they were going to have counters, so I can respect and move with their counters, but just be there. You know what I mean? I knew if I got them here, there's a counter coming. I knew that pattern about them. Whereas with Nick and those guys, there was no pattern. It was just and so I hated that. That was the part that I hated.
And Van Exel, what a great play. And obviously Stoudemire, but Van Exel, I was watching some of his old highlights and I forgot how dynamic he was at one time. I mean, for those 5, 6, 7 years of his early career, he was as dynamic as any point guard in the NBA. And it's with him and Eddie Jones and Kobe and Shaq. I mean, that's another team you always wonder if they would have worked that out somehow, what that could have been like. Because man, they had some talent. They were unbelievable.
Absolutely. Yeah, they were.
When you look back, a couple more questions for you. And again, I appreciate you taking the time to do this today. When you look back at being an undrafted free agent and playing 9 years in the NBA, what would you tell a young kid coming up who doesn't get drafted? What would you tell him? What should his mindset be?
Well, I would say you have many opportunities now. The opportunities for us at that point were very limited. So you had to be very mentally strong, because, like, I got sent back to the CBA, and I could have got, pigeonholed there. But I said, I'm going to use this as an opportunity. So I would say, take every opportunity that is granted and give it unto you. If G League is that, the opportunity is you're getting floor time. You and I both know that if you're on the bottom tier of the bench, you don't get enough opportunity to shine outside of exhibition, outside of the beginning of the season. During the season, it's all just repetition. It's all just scouting reports. It's all, there's really no practice, one-on-one, get after it type, stuff during the season. So having G League opportunities to go up and down to get court time, listen, I'm saying just take every opportunity, just be available and be ready. Just be ready, because you never know when that door is going to creep open, and you got to be able to kick that sucker down when the opportunity presents itself.
That's great advice. And I've had several players on here who are trying to get into the NBA, and they always talk. Actually, Anthony Mason's son, Antoine Mason, he's trying to get in still. So I've had him on and a couple other guys, and I think it's good for them to hear that type of advice coming from someone who did it and who got in and played almost a decade in the NBA. So a couple more questions. One last one. What are you up to nowadays?
So right now, I'm working with a really close friend of mine. He has some projects that he's building. He has a construction, Graveman Construction, and he's building them. He wanted somebody to just kind of help him to move these projects along. He didn't, he just kind of was having some trouble with some project managers and stuff like that. I was kind of sitting at home. I wasn't doing much. And he said, hey, let me test this theory. Can you come in and do this? And sure, you're not doing much. I said, okay, cool. And I actually am liking it. I'm learning it. That's where I'm at right now. So I'm working at this project downtown. It's like 21 units. It's 4 buildings, 4 level. They're like anywhere from $700 to $1 million townhomes that are being built. So
in what city?
So that's fun. It's in Orlando.
Orlando. Okay, nice.
Yeah. So I'm helping him kind of build his business there, and then I have invested in a company called Cerebro Sports. You can look that up, the cerebrosports.com, and what that is it's like where we take the opportunity to identify, find, and create archetypes by way of numbers. So with the game of basketball, and this from our era, it's always been eye test. You see, you like, what is the project, the possibilities of his growth. You're looking at it, okay, yeah, he performed, I like him, I want him, right? It's always been that kind. Whereas what we do is we put numbers to it. So we put analytics to it. We can archetype a player. So if colleges are looking for a specific player, a 3-and-D guy, or they're looking for a stretch 4, the things that have changed is, like you said, in our time, we used to say, if I'm going to Nebraska, or I'm going to Virginia Tech, or wherever I'm going, right? Whereas now they'll say, I'm going to the Virginia Tech, and they're looking at Oregon, and they're looking at, Florida, and they're telling all of them the same thing. So what you end up as a staff, you end up missing a player. And this is why you have the transfer portal so huge every year, is because they end up settling on a player that's not the type of player they want. And so that player becomes frustrated, and he ends up going in the portal because he doesn't fit the niche of that team, right? So what we do is we basically help you to say, okay, you want a 3-and-D guy. You've identified him. If you miss him, is there someone like him somewhere else?
Interesting.
And we help you to find that guy.
That's very cool.
That's been hidden somewhere out in Timbuktu somewhere, and you find him. Like in that movie that Shaq played in. Remember when they found him in the backwoods somewhere? But he just didn't play the AAU circuit, or he can't afford to be in the AAUs. So this is how a John Morant gets found without you having to stumble across him and court's 9, and you're walking to the bathroom and you're like, who the fuck is this guy? You know what I mean? Coach, you need to get down here and see him quick. We can help you find guys like that. And that's what Cerebro does.
That's really cool.
Then I've invested in another company as well that it deals with brain and doing EEGs on the brain. So yeah, that's kind of what I do now, man. Just enjoying this part of life with kids, and 2 in college now and stuff. So yeah.
Wow. So you had 2 kids, or how many?
I have 3.
3. Okay.
2 in college. One's going to Arizona. One's finishing up his JUCO out in DC area, and then I got a baby that's 13 in Miami.
Very cool. Very cool. Yeah, family life, and it's cool hearing all these stories and seeing where you are now and how you know where you went from college MBA to now looking back and having the projects you're working on now. It's very interesting to see how that's gone. And this kind of transitions into my last question. And Eric, I ask every guest this question on the show, and I love hearing the answer. So let's say, take it 20, 30 years from now, and you're retired on a beach somewhere and you're looking back at your life. What do you want people to know about the legacy of Erick Strickland?
I kind of alluded to it from the beginning, that I was a hard-nosed kid that loved the game, and I wanted to be remembered as playing it the right way. That's what I would like for them to remember, is that I played the game, I left it out on the court, I gave my all. If they would have had a stat back then that Tommy Heinsohn talks about it all the time, if they had a stat for the most charges taken in a season, I would probably win that award every year, because I didn't mind sticking my nose in there, whether it be the rebound, whether it be to dive on the floor, whether it be to get the extra possession. I wanted to be able to make a difference whenever I touched the court in some form or fashion.
I love that. And you're right. Like the guys like you now, if you look at the NBA now, it's built on guys like you or Bobby Phills, or guys who are more of the guys who could shoot from the outside, but had more of a defensive presence, or physical, got into people. PJ Tucker, for example, a guy like him who plays defense, but he can also hit that outside shot. I mean, you would thrive in today's NBA, because that's what and I know it's not as physical, but still, with the way you play defense, to me, it would perfectly fit your skill set, so
for
it's
sure.
Interesting how it's thrived. But I like that answer to that question. And you're right. You did play the game the right way, and you don't survive almost a decade in the NBA and the way you did being undrafted unless you do. So, I think you did it the right way, and you had a great career. You look back at it now, and you got to play with some Hall of Fame talent. You got around some very good teams, and you got to play with guys who, who could say they play with a young Dirk, a young Paul Pierce, and guys like Reggie Miller. And it's a really awesome career you had. So,
yeah, thanks, Brad.
Absolutely.
That,
and again, it's cool to interview you, man. Like, there's so many guys I've interviewed who I watched growing up, and I remember you at Nebraska. I remember you being on the Mavericks. Like, it's funny. We still play a game, me and my buddies. It's NBA Live 2000 for N64. We still play. We played it in high school, and you're on it. You're a backup. It's so funny because we know every guy in the game, every single person. So whenever I have guys in the show, we're always like, man, I remember playing with him back in sophomore year. We played these games against each other, and so again, you're one of those.
And
guys
actually, I was pretty good on that game. On that
it was 2000. Yeah,
on that 2000.
Yep, and you guys were. That was probably
pretty good on that one.
That's actually the year you were talking about, that you guys had that run at the end of the year. But you guys had that because you had your talented roster, but you could tell in the game that Dirk's not as good as he probably should have. They probably should have made him better for the game, but you could definitely tell there was some talent there. It just wasn't. It was funny because we always look at the roster. It's a really good roster. But you're one of those guys. So we grew up watching you, man, and it's cool for me to interview guys I grew up watching. So it's an honor for me. So I appreciate you coming on the show.
Well, thanks for reaching out, Brad. I really appreciate that. I think we kind of was touching here and there. I love watching your little segments and your little Instagram things, man. Keep up the good work, man. I appreciate the opportunity to be able to share and speak with you, and anything I can do down the road, man, let me know.
Absolutely, man. We'll definitely keep in touch. So thanks again for coming on the show, and let's do it again.
Sounds good.
All right, thanks,
bro.
Eric. Later, man.